In the scorching heart of the southern Arizona desert, there stood a lone tree that defied all logic. For miles around, there was nothing but sun-baked earth, jagged rock formations, and rolling dunes of golden sand. Yet, against the blistering heat and the unforgiving winds, this solitary tree thrived. Its twisted branches reached toward the sky, covered in dark green leaves that seemed far too lush for the arid wasteland around it. Locals whispered dark tales about the tree, nicknamed the Death Tree for the unsettling number of bodies, both human and animal, discovered beneath its shadow. Some claimed the tree had been planted by the devil himself, thriving off the decaying remains of those who perished beneath its canopy. Others said it was cursed, a place where pure evil lurked, drawing in the desperate and the lost. Still, authorities dismissed these theories, insisting that the deaths were simply a result of exposure to the desert's brutal elements. People, they reasoned, were naturally drawn to the tree in a final, desperate bid for shelter from the relentless sun. But for all their rational explanations, the truth about the Death Tree was far stranger than anyone cared to admit. It had been there as long as anyone could remember. Weathered travelers, ranchers, and even indigenous peoples had stories of encountering the tree. Some who passed by said they felt an uneasy pull toward it, a strange sensation that gnawed at the edges of their mind, whispering promises of shade and respite from the punishing desert. Others who went near it never came back at all. The first recorded death near the Death Tree happened in 1902 when a prospector named William Horn was found slumped against its base. His skin was cracked and burnt from the sun, lips parched, and his eyes frozen wide in terror. It was as if, in his last moments, he had seen something so horrifying that death was a relief. By the 1940s, the tree's reputation had spread. Newspapers ran sensational stories about the strange deaths in the desert, claiming that vultures wouldn't touch the bodies left beneath its limbs. Ranchers began avoiding the area entirely, and even wildlife seemed to steer clear, except for the unfortunate animals that were found dead nearby, their carcasses decaying in the sweltering sun. In the 1970s, hikers discovered a family of 4 who had been traveling through the area. Their car had broken down miles away, but they were found huddled beneath the tree as though they had tried to use it for shelter. The strange part wasn't just their death from dehydration and exposure, it was the twisted expressions on their faces. Even after decomposition had set in, their mouths were locked in ghastly, unnatural smiles, their eyes still wide with fear. The stories grew wilder. One tale involved a young woman, Abigail Reed, who disappeared while backpacking across Arizona. Her body was never found, but her friends claimed she had spoken of wanting to visit the Death Tree, drawn by an inexplicable need to see it for herself. Yet, despite all these dark accounts, the tree continued to stand, untouched by time or the elements. The desert's brutal heat, the endless gusts of sand-filled wind, none of it seemed to weaken the tree's eerie vitality. Its roots dug deep into the earth, and its leaves remained full and dark, casting a shadow that seemed far too wide for such a small tree. One summer, a local sheriff named Hank Watkins decided he'd had enough of the wild rumors surrounding the Death Tree. After another group of young hikers was found dead beneath its boughs, their faces frozen in twisted expressions, Hank drove out to the desert with the intention of debunking the myths once and for all. Its exposure, he told himself as he parked his truck a mile from the tree and started walking. They see the tree and think it's shelter. They get lost, dehydrated, and start hallucinating. That's all it is. But as Hank approached the tree, something about it unnerved him. It wasn't just the unnatural way it stood alone against the empty landscape. It was the feeling, the sensation of being watched. He shrugged it off, attributing it to the oppressive heat that was already making his head pound. Still, each step toward the tree felt heavier, as though the air around him was thickening, pressing down on him. When he reached the base of the tree, Hank noticed something strange. The ground beneath it wasn't cracked and dry like the rest of the desert, it was soft, almost moist. His boots left deep imprints as he circled the trunk. The air felt cooler here, as though the tree had somehow trapped a pocket of chilled air beneath its branches. Hank leaned in closer, examining the bark. It was gnarled and rough, but there were strange markings etched into it, symbols he didn't recognize. They looked old, ancient even, like something carved by hands long gone. Suddenly, Hank felt a sharp pang in his chest. He stumbled back, gasping for air. The pain spread, a cold, icy feeling creeping through his veins. His vision blurred, and the world around him began to spin. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest, as the overwhelming sensation of dread took hold. In that moment, Hank realized something terrible. The stories were true. The tree wasn't just a strange anomaly in the desert. It was something far more sinister, something that fed on the lives of those who ventured too close. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Hank looked up at the tree. Its branches seemed to shift, moving ever so slightly, as if they were reaching down toward him. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the tree's roots, writhing in the earth, as though they were alive. Hank's body was found 2 days later by a group of hikers. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, likely brought on by the heat and exhaustion. But those who knew the stories about the death tree weren't so sure. As word of Hank's death spread, the whispers grew louder. Some said the tree had claimed him, just as it had claimed the others. Others insisted that the devil had planted the tree, and that it thrived off the souls of those who died near it. The deaths, they argued, weren't caused by the desert's harsh conditions, they were caused by pure, malevolent evil. Over the years, more bodies were found near the tree, drifters, hikers, even animals. And yet, despite the increasing number of deaths, the tree continued to stand, its branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers, waiting for its next victim. Authorities continued to dismiss the supernatural explanations. They insisted the deaths were the result of exposure, that those who died had simply made the mistake of thinking the tree would provide shelter. But the locals knew better. In the quiet of the night, when the wind whispered through the desert, they would talk in hushed tones about the death tree. About the strange pull it had on those who ventured too close. About the eerie silence that seemed to surround it, broken only by the soft rustling of its leaves. And about the feeling, the overwhelming, gut-wrenching feeling, that something evil lurked beneath its roots, waiting, always waiting. No one could explain how the tree survived in the desolate landscape, nor why so many bodies were found near it. But one thing was certain, the death tree was more than just a tree. It was a monument to something dark, something ancient. And for those who ventured too close, it was a death sentence.